This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the famous Dr. Buck Melton, who apparently did not make it to the White House in the last electoral cycle.
I'm happy not to have
you,
done so.
You're handling that okay, I hope.
Yes. So, well, it might be a bit of fake news, but I hear that I actually was elected. So.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll await developments on that. Well, we have lots of things we talk about, and we could consider the influence of foreign governments or foreign interests on just U.S. policy in general. And there's a lot of discussion about maybe the Russians did something, but isn't that just par for the course? I mean, this is a big, huge, most important country in the world, has impact everywhere, and foreign interests routinely try and impact our policies, do they not? Has that always been that way?
Oh, yes, and it's above board, it's open. They have a strong presence on K Street. There are very strong and open demonstrations. For instance, the Canadian Embassy, our biggest trade partner, Canada, and the Canadian Embassy has got its embassy sort of built like a battleship pointed directly towards Congress. I mean, the building of the new embassy a couple of decades ago, the building itself is a statement.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's perfectly normal.
So actually, one way things happen would be, and this is the way the deal is in Washington, I think most people would say that, our representatives arrive there. The issues are extremely complicated, and often their ambition is to continue to stay in office. So
Yes.
the calculus of that is constantly on their mind, how to do things. And so when complicated issues appear, they often are influenced by contributions from whatever source, and the information they receive. Now, is there some kind of limitation on what foreign governments can do to people in Congress? I guess I would ask that question.
Well, the idea, and I don't think this is limited to foreign governments, but any type of lobbying, if there is too blatant a connection between the money and an outcome, the idea of pay to play, then that raises eyebrows. Or if you have outside business interests. I mean, just today as we're filming this, that Donald Trump held his first press conference in many moons, and one of the chief items to address was how is he going to divest himself of his interests, or at least distance himself from his interests, so as to avoid anything that looks like a conflict of interest.
Yes.
So anytime you've got a connection between, too obvious a connection between money and policy, that's a problem. So the problem here is, and I think this is what you're getting at, is if we have Russian influence in the election somehow, what's different
Yes.
with that? Why are people so upset?
Yes, actually, I think you made the point, and we
Yes.
can just keep circling back toward that. But the idea is that it's a slightly different nuance to it. But the decision makers are constantly being suborned
Yes.
by interest of one type or another from every source, and many of them would be very powerful, and they also have many countries have dual citizenship. In fact, I don't know how many dual citizens we have here, but we have huge numbers of dual citizenship. I mean, I wonder what the number is. That'd be a big question.
That'd be something to look up. But
it was many millions,
Yes.
many millions, and those. So there is a natural constituency. I don't know, whatever the story would be. A natural constituency. Maybe we'll pick Cuba. People do or don't want something done in Cuba, and there's a very powerful lobbying thing, either trying to take the government out or put the government in. Similarly, you could say, particularly in the Middle East. I mean, it'd be a natural arrangement. I mean, it was no surprise that there'd be strong lobbying groups both from Israel and from the Arab countries that would be, and having the citizens here, would be trying to impact the decisions that are made, which would be, those things happen, do they not?
Well, I don't really know if the dual citizenship is that big a deal, but perhaps not for the reason that you might think. I think the assumption that you are working from, or possibly working from, is that citizenship indicates some sort of loyalty or some sort of privileged status. But in this increasingly global world, citizenship, I think, may be less about loyalty and simply more about bureaucratic information as to where you get taxed or something like that. Certainly, we have seen, and I think of who was the pastor of the controversial pastor that Barack Obama attended his church for, Jeremiah Wright, and the God blank America, and it wasn't Bliss.
Right.
So obviously, presumably, he's an American citizen, but in some sense, he is extremely critical of the United States. I'm critical of some elements of government policy. I imagine you are too. So I'm not sure how much citizenship or dual citizenship really tells us. Now, if there's a country that says in order to be able to lobby, you have to be a citizen, it might be of some utilitarian value. But in this global world, what are your loyalties?
I guess what I was getting into, or trying to make this point, number one, the impact of foreign governments on lobbying.
Yes.
Impact number two is many countries have their constituency already in the United States, the people that have some kind of loyalty to or disdain, as far as that goes,
which
to
might be
another
ethnic,
country, and that group of people is going to try and impact U.S. policy toward their country, their country of origin, either favorably or non-favorably. They, for instance, might want, if you're a Mexican with dual citizenship, you're going to, and the government is saying whatever they're saying here. Let's do this. Let's support NAFTA. And then your relatives back in Mexico are benefiting for it, and the government. You could imagine people that have vested interest in other places would try and influence U.S. policy, which I don't think you could say is necessarily wrong, but at least. What I'm getting at is understanding what the situation that's always existed with the impact on our foreign policy and generally the U.S. relationships.
Yes. Well, I may be splitting hairs here, but I would say in that case, without diluting your essential point, that the connection there would not be so much that I have dual citizenship in the U.S. and Mexico as I have family back home. My parents live in Mexico. That's the thing that really
whatever the story is. I mean,
or ethnically, the Jewish lobby for Israel.
Which is considering everything, not an abnormal circumstance. But just understanding that's what's going on here. And then we finally get to we get to what's transpired, which is pretty extraordinary, the allegations in the elections. This is a new thing. So the things have already existed. They're in precedent. Okay, that's just normal. But the other thing that's out there is trying to basically put information into the political contest and then influencing, sort of by sophistry in a way, the opinions that voters have. And it's sort of the influence, rather than being sort of a more direct one, is a lot more indirect, and it's a surprise to see that most people wouldn't imagine this would happen.
Yes, well, maybe it says something about the naivete of the American people. You mentioned Cuba a few minutes ago, and that makes me think of two things. First of all, in terms of influencing foreign policy, all of the CIA conspiracies to remove Castro, which obviously is
exploding cigar. So that's a good idea, right? I've got it. Says someone. You will put dynamite in a cigar, like a comic strip event here.
But that also reminds me of a story that took place when I was a graduate student at that liberal hotbed called Duke University. And somebody was coming to speak, or I think the CIA was coming on campus to recruit, and a very large element of the student body was very upset about that, and they put up flyers, and this was back in the late 80s. And one of the flyers, I remember, said the CIA is terrible because it bombed Havana. And I'm thinking, well, gee, I'm studying history right
Where
now, and
they
I don't
go?
remember the CIA. So, and they actually gave some sort of citation on the flyers. So I went into the library, I looked up the citation, and that was a book, and it referred me to a couple of other things, which referred me to a newspaper article. So after about an hour of digging, I finally got to the original source.
Yes.
And the original source was an article, I think, in the New York Times in 1963 or something like this, in which the reporter interviewed someone who said that a friend of his told him that a plane came over and dropped leaflets on Havana, and somebody else said that plane belonged to the CIA.
Yes, right.
And
so
so that got, it somehow transformed through the fake news process into
Yes.
we bombed Havana.
Yes.
But at least that even gave us some sort of paper trail to follow.
Yes, yes.
But what about stuff that's just being made up?
Well, now I wonder, is this ever, a next question to ask is, has it ever happened before? I mean, and this is an important issue. So we have, everything is filtered through the media. It's filtered
Yes.
through the media. And so if someone said, I'm going to try and influence this election by having you put, I don't know, whatever, maybe we want to be nice to China, let's say.
Yes.
Let's put I'm going to, and you know, you're one of, I'm influencing the election by having you put a news story on about an orphanage where people
Yes.
are nicely treated in China, and that has an impact to influence U.S. policy.
Yes,
And so you
yes.
could do it that way with the stories that are being planted, and that seems to have been something that I would imagine has been going on a long time. And then we finally get to the last shoe that's fallen, which is emails, discovering emails that are supposedly sacrosanct. Is there, if someone hacks into your email and you're a public official, do you have any protection? I mean, what is the story there?
Well, I would imagine that, you know, I'm not aware of the particular statutes, but if you have something that is considered privileged government information, I am sure that there are both civil and perhaps even criminal penalties involved in doing that. I mean, just basic stuff, like sometimes when I go to a Department of Defense website in my own research, you'll
Yes.
get a notice, this website is a government installation, and if
Right,
you,
yes.
and you've got to be careful here, and you may be monitored, and this sort of thing. So without knowing specific statutes, I'd say, yeah. It's,
Well, I'm wondering, so apparently the Democratic Party was hacked, or at least their organization. Now, is there, and these are the people that had their information hacked were public officials.
yes.
And is there, presumably it was confidential, but there wasn't any secret patina around it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that legal to do that? I mean, just
Well,
someone, you're a public official, this
Yes.
is out there, and
Well, theft of
this-
information. I mean, if there's something of value and it's taken from you, then just even under common law, I think you've got an action for theft, or perhaps burglary. Although burglary sort of connotes a physical entry and breaking and entering. But then there's the problem of A, realizing it's happened, B, trying to trace back through usually proxy servers
Yes.
or fake servers or something like that, figuring out who did it. C, if you can figure out what computer did it, then who was at the computer when it happened. And D, even if you can figure that out, questions of jurisdiction. If this was all done in some place in Kazakhstan or something, can you
Yes.
get jurisdiction? Is there an extradition treaty? Who knows?
Well, so I'm getting into a little bit is, okay, this is a bad thing that happened, and what options are there if things are hacked? Now, one of the things going on now, in many ways, is in the healthcare world, people are hacking private information and then trying to blackmail the purveyors or controllers of that information.
Yes.
So, well, okay, you have 100,000 medical records. I'm now in possession of these medical records. You had the responsibility to keep them safe, and now you couldn't do that, and you pay me $400,000 or whatever. So those kind of things, those kind of crimes are out there. What option does a person that's been hacked have? So presumably the Democratic Party had their information was hacked, but private people have their information hacked. Is that a crime? And will the government attempt to pursue the people that did that? And
Yes.
it might be difficult, but would they do that?
Yes.
Do they have the obligation to pursue hackers?
Well, once again, if nothing else, there would have to be a serious question of, do we have the resources to divert to this ghost who's out there halfway around the world that we may not be able to get jurisdiction over? So that's a big issue right there. Common law, I mean, you use the word blackmail. I mean, if it's blackmail,
Yes.
and it happens here in Georgia, then obviously you've got Georgia criminal statutes. The
Yes.
problem is catching the person and bringing them to book.
And the amount of resources
Yes.
society can devote to it. So
Yes.
yeah, many times people, I mean, the common story is, well, someone, I don't know, whatever they did, they stole my pocketbook or something.
Yes.
And the
Or
police
identity
are,
theft,
or,
yes.
well, what I'm saying is that it's sort of not such a big deal.
Yes.
And the police officials don't routinely go, they're not going to spend thousands of dollars and millions of man hours
For a $25.
Right, someone, they'll record that. I hope you had, the normal story is, I hope you had insurance.
Yes.
That's the normal arrangement.
Yes. Well, a couple of points, and we can use that to extrapolate. Let's say that I don't steal your wallet, but while you're down the hall, I look in it and I take down your credit card number and I go on a spending spree. Would that be a crime?
Yes, it
Yes.
could be.
Okay, so what if I look in your computer remotely through the internet and find your credit card number? And the same,
Yeah,
I do the
say it
same
would be a similar
Yes,
crime.
so obviously, it's not a matter of physical intrusion. There's
Right,
taking
yes,
the wallet,
yes,
there's
right,
taking the
right,
number.
right.
So the other thing I would like to point out regarding the internet going all the way back to its beginnings with the Department of Defense and the universities, ARPANET, was designed for open and free exchange of information.
Yes.
I mean, if you really think about it in the Cold War sense, the East, or the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union, was all about controlling information and movement
still
of
is,
populations.
still
Yes,
is.
the Berlin Wall. Whereas the Western countries are about mostly open exchange of ideas and information. So you have to remember, before you put anything on the internet is designed for open, easy access. The idea of securing things or encrypting your email, that's almost an afterthought. So it really is the Wild West. So you're running a risk by putting something on the internet, no matter how good the security is.
Yes, yes.
So,
Well, now, the idea is that Russia, there's a debate about what has occurred here, but the
Yes.
idea is the Russians did this, they're influencing the American election by doing this.
yes.
And we've said there are many different things that have happened in the past with foreign governments, I guess, trying to change our policy.
Yes.
But this seems to be a pretty overt thing. And what would be the cure for it? I mean, is it just better cybersecurity? I mean, what does one do about this? And what about false stories being generated?
Yes.
And some country just says, here's a false story, there's false news out there. And,
Yes. Well, I think you're asking two different questions. They may be related, but they're different. First of all, cybersecurity. Why, assuming the whole Russian thing is credible, and it's looking increasingly credible as we go, what is so bad about that? I mean, for instance, we've already mentioned the exploding cigar.
Yes.
What about the Marshall Plan right after the war? We were pouring billions into Europe to try to make sure that the countries that grew out of World War II, that the regimes that grew out of World War II were of a particular type.
Yes.
What about Citizen Genet, who was France's
Yes.
ambassador to the United States during the French Revolution, who was actually openly granting commissions to U.S. merchant ships to fight for France? I mean,
Yes.
just above board. What is it about this? I think it is two things. It was not open, it was covert. And secondly, it was aimed at the election process itself. And there is still, everything's up for grab in terms of partisan acrimony and debate these
Yes.
days. But if there's anything left that's sacrosanct, I would say it's probably the election process. And so I think that's what has gotten some people bothered about.
I have some Italian friends, and one of the things that disturbs them, I think, were the post-World War II elections in Italy,
Yes, yes.
when the communists were really riding high, and there was a conservative political party against them, and the CIA, with all sorts of nefarious devices, basically flipped the election to the conservative group.
Yes.
And many people on the Italian left said, well, this is exactly what's happened.
Yes.
And we're going, what the U.S. has done overseas. Famously in Chile, they were giving money for coups and whatever. And in general, the intelligence agencies, maybe they're routinely doing this. Maybe this is just we do it, and then maybe all the other countries are doing it in different ways. I wonder if there is a similar story when the U.S. somehow got information on a particular political person and then got that information into the electoral process, so it injured the anti-U.S. person. You think that it wouldn't be? Would you imagine it's happened? Would you not?
I'd be surprised if it hadn't. I mean, if we have been open to assassinating foreign leaders or backing coups as we did in Vietnam in 1963,
yes.
So I'd be very surprised. A related question you asked was, is the answer simply better cybersecurity? I think this is a place where the forces of entropy actually have the advantage. When, for instance, Reagan was talking about the Strategic Defense Initiative back in the 80s, put up missile-killing satellites. Somebody pointed out, no matter how good the system is, simply launch another satellite and throw a ton of sand out in front of the oncoming, and the sand just destroys it. It's easier to destroy than create. The easiest thing in the world to bring down a system is what's called a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack. And that's when you simply spam the server that you want to bring down. You simply hit it with request after request after request, and the server is so busy trying to answer that it can't do anything else.
Right.
It's crude but very effective. So what can you do? What about the fake news? That's an entirely different question. If somebody invents news and injects it. The day we're taping this is the day that BuzzFeed has published all of this alleged information about compromising information on Trump that the Russians have. What do we do about this?
Yes, that's a substantial problem, and that's possibly a conversation for another venue or another time.
Yes.
But the information that's put before the public is often either filtered or unfiltered.
Yes.
So filtered information would be, it's true enough. This is somewhat true. It's about an orphanage in China. It's a true story about a small detail, but actually just hypothetically at the same time, something terrible is happening. It's one little good story, and that's what appears on the news. Now, is that different than a direct falsehood? In a way, the story is a false one because it doesn't give you the global picture for what an American would like to know, and that to me is just as false as just something that's a little more obvious. Well, we're going to say something good about China. Well, the Chinese sent a man to the moon, something like that. It's obviously false, but the impact might actually be such an extreme story that the impact is counterproductive. So sometimes false news is a counterproductive way to influence people, as opposed to just picking the detail that you want to talk about. Yes, that's right.
Not even the detail, the adjective. Of course, the story that and the first president that I heard this used on was Richard Nixon, that if Richard Nixon demonstrated he could walk on water, the headlines the next day would read, "Nixon can't swim."
Yes, right, yes.
Possibly true, but it's all in how the story is told.
Right, yes. So. And so the disinformation is out there. It's a very complicated kind of world. And there does seem to be a sort of sense of shock that's the arrest all the usual suspects, or it's I guess the people that have in Washington have been inured to such events. They imagine they're always going to happen, and they are pretty sanguine about it. and then they play it up as some kind of very shocking turn of events here.
Yes, this is I think a weakness of a system that is based on popular government, such as the United States. That if the ultimate governors are the people or the voters, then in order to get some sort of responsible government, then the voters have to be both interested and informed. They have to be willing to follow the news and do some digging and find out the truth. And I think this is the more important problem, they have to be able to do that. And we could have an interesting conversation on whether or not the internet has enhanced their ability to do that or it's impeded their ability. I think I would come down on the side of the former, but I'd have to think about that because there is so much, so many people with agendas, there is so much stuff that is just simply fabricated out there now.
Well, so, in a lot of ways, the democratic system depends on the idea that you have intelligent, informed voters, and they're going to try and do the right thing. They're going to be disinterested voters. They're going to try and pick the right way, the right path for the country. They ponder all information. They have access to all information. They spend huge amounts of time brooding about it, as a person in a jury would. You're in the jury box. You would just taking every detail, cogitating about it, spending a huge amount of time on it. The details that were received would be, in some ways, pretty clearly stated. There'd be great efforts to obtain the correct information for the jury. The information appearing that was not correct would be tossed out. The judge would make sure the information was correct. Well, that idea is so far away from our political process.
I was going to ask how you thought that fit in.
It's so far away.
Yes.
And so we have this terrifically imperfect system that in a lot of ways we could argue is it growing more imperfect in the sense that the filtering of the news is, if it ever was disinterested, is certainly not disinterested now.
Yes.
So the stories that are being put out, the information that's being received is jaded, not correct often. And the American voters and citizens are so overwhelmed with their daily life that they can't devote the extraordinary amount of effort and time to come up with a appropriate opinion about a political figure. So as a result, people are often influenced in a very haphazard way.
Yes.
And those weaknesses seem to be on display in the last electoral cycle.
Yeah, it's many of the arguments against truly pure direct democracy. Some people occasionally will say now that we have the internet and now that we have instant communication, why do we need a legislature? Why do we need a Congress? Let's just have the entire public vote on issues. But some of these issues are tremendously complicated and the background needed to make an informed decision, we simply don't, it would be more than a full-time job to do it. So the reason we have representative assemblies still are not because we can't technically bypass them. It's because of the knowledge situation. And are people really disinterested? Absolutely not. I think, and once again, I think it would be easy to look up pro and con views on reputable websites, reputable news. Perhaps not. We could get into an epistemological discussion of how do you know what the truth is. But do people want to do that, or do they simply want to stay in the echo chamber of their choice?
Well, on that note, Bucky, we'll end our little interchange, and thank you once again for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Very, very stimulating interchange, I must say.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.